Rose Garrison's reflection stared back at her from the dusty mercantile window, a woman of generous proportions in a world that seemed to favor delicate frames. The year was 1878, and Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, was experiencing the kind of scorching summer day that made even the rattlesnakes seek shade. Rose wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, adjusted her worn calico dress, and gathered her courage to enter Schmidt's general store, ignoring the whispers that always seemed to follow her through town. There goes the Garrison girl. Pretty face, but Lord, what a size on her. The words weren't meant for her ears, but Rose heard them anyway. At 22, she had grown accustomed to the sidelong glances and hushed comments about her fuller figure. Her mother had been the same way, ample-hipped and buxom before consumption had claimed her 3 winters ago, leaving Rose to care for her ailing father on their struggling homestead. Inside the store, Rose handed her short list to Mr. Schmidt, a balding German immigrant with kind eyes who never made her feel less than welcome. Flour, coffee, sugar, and if you have any of that peppermint candy left, I'd like 2 pieces, Rose said, counting the coins in her palm carefully. For you, Miss Garrison, I have 3 pieces, Mr. Schmidt replied with a wink, placing the wrapped candies atop her other purchases. As Rose gathered her goods, the bell above the door jangled, announcing new customers. 2 young women from town entered, daughters of the banker and the doctor, both wearing finely tailored dresses that accentuated their slender waists. They tittered behind gloved hands when they spotted Rose. "Good day, ladies," Rose nodded politely, refusing to show how their presence affected her. "Rose," the banker's daughter, Eliza, acknowledged with barely concealed disdain. "I see you're stocking up, planning to hibernate through the summer as well as winter." The doctor's daughter laughed sharply before adding, "We're gathering supplies for the Founder's Day dance." "You'll be attending, I presume? Though I can't imagine who would ask you to partner for the Virginia Reel." Rose clutched her purchases tighter. "I have chores waiting. Good day." She pushed past them and out into the blinding sunlight, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. Rose had long ago accepted that dances, courtships, and marriage proposals were not in her future. Not in a place like Fort Sumner where eligible men had their pick of slim, graceful partners. The ride home in her father's old wagon was lonely, 5 miles of dust and scrub brush stretching between town and the Garrison homestead. When she arrived, her father was sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of pine wood, his once strong hands now gnarled with arthritis. "How was town?" Thomas Garrison asked, setting aside his project. "Same as always, Pa," Rose replied, forcing brightness into her voice as she carried the supplies inside. That evening, after her father had retired to bed, Rose sat on the porch steps in the gathering darkness. The New Mexican night was cooling rapidly, stars appearing one by one in the vastness above. In the distance, coyotes called to one another, their cries melancholy and haunting, much like the ache in her own heart. "Lord," she whispered, "I know I should be grateful for what I have. A good father, a roof over my head, food enough to eat, but sometimes," her voice caught, "sometimes I wish someone would look at me and see more than just my size, see me." A single tear slid down her cheek as the loneliness of her existence washed over her. Then another tear followed, and another, until she was sobbing quietly into her apron. She was so absorbed in her sorrow that she didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Startled, Rose looked up to see a rider on a tall bay horse coming up the path to their home. She hastily wiped her tears and stood, reaching for the rifle that always rested by the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The horseman stopped a respectful distance away. "Name's Brock Vance, madam." I don't mean to intrude, but I saw the lamplight and hoped I might ask for water for my horse. Been riding since dawn." As he dismounted, Rose could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, with a strong jawline shadowed by several days' worth of beard. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and the gun on his hip looked well-maintained. "We've got a pump out back by the barn," Rose said cautiously. "You can water your horse there." "Much obliged," he replied, doffing his hat in thanks. The gesture revealed dark hair with a slight curl to it. As he led his horse toward the barn, Rose noticed his bow-legged gait, the walk of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. She debated going inside but decided against appearing fearful. This was her home, after all. Instead, she remained standing on the porch, one hand still near the rifle. When Brock Vance returned, he stopped at the foot of the steps and looked up at her with eyes that seemed to reflect the starlight. "I apologize for disturbing your evening," he said softly. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he added, "You've been crying." Rose stiffened. "It's nothing. Just the dust in my eyes." A small, knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Must be powerful dust to leave such tracks on a lady's face." His directness took her aback. Most men in these parts preferred to pretend female emotions didn't exist at all. "It's been a long day," she admitted, suddenly conscious of her tear-stained face and rumpled dress. "Are you passing through or do you have business in Fort Sumner?" "Bit of both," he replied. "Looking for work, somewhere to settle for a spell. Been drifting since the war ended." The mention of the war placed him in his 30s, Rose guessed, though his face was youthful beneath the trail dust. "There's the Diamond Bar Ranch that sometimes hires hands," she offered. "And Thornton's place to the south." He nodded his thanks. "And you, miss?" "Garrison, Rose Garrison. My father and I run this homestead." "A pleasure, Miss Garrison." He replaced his hat. "If you don't mind my saying so, whatever caused those tears isn't worth your sorrow." "Not when the world has plenty of real troubles in it." Rose bristled slightly. "You don't know anything about me, Mr. Vance." "True enough," he conceded with a slight smile. "But I know something about people. Been watching them a long while." Before she could respond, he climbed back into the saddle. "Thank you for the water. Perhaps I'll see you in town sometime." With a touch of his hat brim, he rode off into the darkness, leaving Rose with an odd feeling she couldn't quite name. It wasn't until she was lying in bed later that she realized what it was. For the brief time they'd spoken, Brock Vance had really looked at her without a single glance at her size. The next morning dawned hot and clear. Rose was up before the sun, feeding the chickens and milking their cow before starting breakfast. Her father joined her in the kitchen, moving slowly but determined to help despite his aching joints. "I heard voices last night," he said, pouring himself coffee. "A rider stopped for water," Rose explained, flipping cornmeal flapjacks on the griddle. "Said his name was Brock Vance." Thomas Garrison grunted. "Stranger then, seems to be looking for work. Mentioned he fought in the war." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "Confederate or Union?" "He didn't say." Rose set a plate before him. "Eat while it's hot, Pa." They ate in comfortable silence, the routine familiar after years alone together. When they finished, Rose cleared the dishes while her father prepared to check the fences on the north side of their small property. "I can do that, Pa," Rose protested, seeing how stiffly he moved. "And have me sitting useless all day." "No, daughter, I'll take my time about it." He patted her shoulder. "You focus on the garden. Those beans won't pick themselves." By midday, Rose had harvested a basketful of green beans and was contemplating whether to start canning them or wait until she had more. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she paused to wipe her forehead with her apron. That's when she heard hoofbeats again. This time, It was Brock Vance and another man, the foreman from the Diamond Bar Ranch. They stopped at the edge of the garden and the foreman called out a greeting. "Morning, Miss Garrison. Your pa around?" "He's checking the north fence line, Mr. Cooper. Something I can help with?" Cooper nodded toward Brock. "Mr. Vance here says you mentioned we might be hiring. We are, as it happens. Thought I'd check with your father about his character, seeing as he stayed here last night." Rose felt her cheeks warm. "He didn't stay here, Mr. Cooper. He merely watered his horse and continued on his way." Cooper looked between them, eyes narrowing slightly. "I see. Well, when your pa returns, tell him Vance will be working at Diamond Bar if he needs to find him." "I will," Rose promised, aware of Brock's steady gaze upon her. As Cooper turned his horse, Brock lingered a moment longer. "Miss Garrison," he said with a nod. "Mr. Vance," she returned, suddenly conscious of her dirt-streaked face and sweat-dampened dress. "Congratulations on finding work so quickly. Thank you for pointing me in the right direction." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "I hope today finds you with fewer troubles." Before she could respond, he wheeled his horse and followed Cooper down the road. Rose watched them go, feeling oddly flustered by the brief encounter. That evening at supper, she mentioned the visit to her father. "Cooper's a good judge of men," Thomas said, sopping up gravy with a biscuit. "If he hired this Vance fellow, he must have seen something worth taking a chance on." Rose nodded, pushing her food around her plate. "Mr. Cooper seemed to think Mr. Vance stayed here last night." Her father's bushy eyebrows rose. "And why would he think that?" "I'm not sure," Rose replied, though she suspected Brock might have implied as much to secure the job. The thought both bothered and intrigued her. "Well, no harm done," Thomas said. "Though we should be careful about strangers. Times aren't what they used to be." "Yes, Pa," Rose agreed, though her thoughts remained on the stranger with the kind eyes who had noticed her tears. The following Saturday was market day in Fort Sumner. Rose and her father loaded their wagon with vegetables from their garden, eggs from their chickens, and the jams Rose had made from wild berries. The extra income was vital to their survival, especially with her father's worsening condition. The town square was bustling when they arrived. Ranchers, farmers, and townsfolk mingled, trading goods and gossip in equal measure. Rose helped her father set up their small stand, arranging the produce attractively, despite knowing that most people would pass them by for the larger farm's offerings. As the morning progressed, sales were slow but steady. Thomas went to speak with the blacksmith about repairing a broken plow blade, leaving Rose to mind their goods. She was rearranging the jars of jam when a shadow fell across the table. "I hear your raspberry preserves are the best in the county." Rose looked up to find Brock Vance standing before her, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes, though still unmistakably a cowboy in his bearing. "That's kind of you to say, Mr. Vance," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "Though I suspect you haven't tried Mrs. Henderson's. Hers won the county fair last year." He picked up a jar, examining the rich red contents. "I trust my own judgment. How much?" 15 cents. He placed a quarter on the table. "I'll take 2. As Rose carefully wrapped the jars in newspaper, she asked, "How are you finding work at Diamond Bar?" "Hard but fair," he replied. "Cooper runs a tight outfit." She handed him the wrapped preserves. "Your change, Mr. Vance." He shook his head. "Keep it. Consider it interest on the loan of your water the other night." Rose started to protest, but he continued, "I'm heading to the dance tonight. Will you be there?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her attendance at a social function in years, not since the last time she'd been humiliated by standing against the wall all evening while others twirled around the dance floor. "I don't believe so," she said stiffly. "There's much to do at home." Something like understanding flickered in his eyes. Shame. I was hoping for a chance to try those fancy Eastern dances I've been hearing about. He tipped his hat. Another time, perhaps. As he walked away, Rose felt a mixture of relief and regret. The idea of attending the dance was both tempting and terrifying. But what was the point? She would only end up sitting alone, watching others enjoy themselves. Later that afternoon, as they prepared to head home with their unsold goods, her father surprised her. "Why don't you go to the dance tonight?" Rose looked at him sharply. "And leave you alone." "I'm not dead yet, girl," he chuckled. "I can manage one evening by myself. You're young, you should be enjoying yourself." "You know how those dances are for me, Pa," she said quietly, checking the harness on their old mare. Thomas Garrison's weathered face softened. That cowboy seemed interested enough. Heat rose in Rose's cheeks. He was just being polite. "Maybe," her father conceded. "But you won't know unless you go." The seed was planted, and as they rode home, Rose found herself considering the possibility. What if, just this once, things were different? What if Brock Vance was genuinely interested in her company? By the time they reached their homestead, Rose had made her decision. After unloading the wagon and ensuring her father had everything he needed for the evening, she pulled out the one good dress she owned, a deep blue cotton that her mother had sewn for her 19th birthday. It was slightly outdated now, but still presentable. She bathed using precious water heated on the stove, washed her hair, and pinned it up in a simple but elegant style. The dress was snugger than she remembered, but it would have to do. There was no time or material for alterations. "You look beautiful," her father said when she emerged from her bedroom. "Just like your mother." Rose blinked back tears at the comparison. Elizabeth Garrison had been a handsome woman, comfortable in her own skin despite society's preferences. Rose had always admired that quality in her mother, though she'd never managed to cultivate it in herself. "Thank you, Pa," she whispered, kissing his cheek. "Don't wait up. I'll take the wagon and be home before midnight." The town hall was transformed for the dance, with lanterns strung across the ceiling and wildflowers arranged in mason jars on every available surface. A small band played in the corner, fiddle, banjo, and piano, creating a lively atmosphere. Rose slipped in quietly, hoping to avoid notice until she could gauge the room. Of course, in a town the size of Fort Sumner, anonymity was impossible. Several heads turned as she entered, and she heard the whispers start immediately. "Rose Garrison, at a dance, must be desperate for a husband. That dress is about to split at the seams." Rose kept her chin up, moving toward a row of chairs against the wall. She would sit for a while, and if no one approached her, she would leave with dignity intact. She had just settled herself when Eliza and her friends entered, their dresses more elaborate than Rose's simple cotton. They spotted her immediately, eyebrows raising in mock surprise. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Eliza said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Did you finally wear out that poor old horse dragging you into town, Rose?" Rose felt the familiar sting of humiliation burning her cheeks, but before she could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Miss Garrison, there you are. I was beginning to think you wouldn't honor your promise to save me a dance." Brock Vance stood before her, hand extended, expression pleasant but neutral, as if they'd arranged this meeting days ago. Confused but grateful, Rose placed her hand in his. "Mr. Vance." He led her toward the dance floor as a waltz began, leaving Eliza and her friends staring after them in astonishment. Rose felt their eyes boring into her back. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered as Brock placed a respectful hand at her waist. "Do what?" he asked innocently, guiding her into the first steps. "Rescue me. Create a fiction about promised dances." He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Perhaps I was rescuing myself, Miss Garrison. I've been standing here for an hour watching men who don't deserve the title ask every woman but the one I wanted to dance with." Rose nearly missed a step. "You shouldn't say things you don't mean, Mr. Vance." "I rarely do," he replied, his hand firm but gentle on her waist. "One of my many character flaws, according to my late mother. Too direct for my own good." As they moved across the floor, Rose was acutely aware of her size compared to the other dancing women. She felt ungainly, certain that Brock must be regretting his gallant gesture. "You dance well," he commented, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort. "My mother taught me," she admitted, "though it's been many years since I've had occasion to practice." "A crime," he said with mock seriousness, "depriving the men of Fort Sumner of such a graceful partner." Rose couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "Now I know you're being kind. Graceful is not a word often applied to me." His expression sobered. "Then the people of Fort Sumner need their eyes examined." The waltz ended, and Rose expected him to escort her back to her seat. Instead, he kept her hand in his as the next song began a lively reel that had couples forming two lines. "Another?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Are you sure?" Rose hesitated. "People are watching." "Let them," he said simply. "I'm dancing with the woman I chose. Why should I care what others think of it?" Throughout the evening, Brock claimed most of Rose's dances, stepping aside only occasionally when another ranch hand or shopkeeper's son worked up the courage to approach her. Each time, he would return as soon as the music changed, offering his hand with a quiet confidence that gradually eased Rose's self-consciousness. During a break while the musicians refreshed themselves, Brock brought Rose a cup of punch and led her outside to the small porch behind the town hall. The night air was cool, a welcome relief after the heat of the crowded room. "Thank you," Rose said, sipping the sweet drink, "for everything tonight. You've been very kind." Brock leaned against the railing, studying her in the moonlight. "It's not kindness, Miss Garrison. No." She looked up at him, puzzled. "Then what would you call it?" "Self-interest," he replied with a small smile. "I wanted to dance with you, simple as that." Rose shook her head, not believing him. "We barely know each other, Mr. Vance. That's easily remedied." He set his cup aside. "I'm 34 years old, born in Virginia. Fought for the Confederacy because that's what Virginians did, though I had no love for the cause. Drifted west after the war, worked cattle in Texas, Kansas, Colorado. Never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home." He paused. "Your turn." Despite herself, Rose found his directness refreshing. 22. Born right here in Fort Sumner. Never been more than 50 miles from this spot. Lost my mother to consumption 3 years ago. Been caring for my father and our small farm ever since." Brock nodded, taking this in. "And what does Rose Garrison want out of life? Besides escaping town dances at the first opportunity?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked what she wanted before. It was always assumed she would remain on the homestead, caring for her father until he passed, then likely moving in with some distant cousin as the spinster relation. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never really thought about it." "That's a shame," he said quietly. "A woman with your strength should have dreams." "My strength?" Rose echoed, confused. "Running a farm, caring for your father, facing a town full of people who clearly don't appreciate you." His eyes met hers steadily. "That takes strength." Rose felt something shift inside her at his words, a recognition of herself she hadn't experienced before. Before she could respond, the music started up again inside, and Brock offered his hand. "One more dance before I return you to your wagon?" he asked. She placed her hand in his. "Yes, I'd like that." The final dance was a slow waltz, As they moved across the floor, Rose was aware of the stairs but found, surprisingly, that they bothered her less than before. There was something about Brock's steady presence that anchored her against the current of judgment she'd been swimming against her entire life. When the music ended, he escorted her outside to where her wagon waited. The town was quiet now, most of the revelry contained within the hall behind them. "May I call on you tomorrow?" Brock asked as he helped her up to the seat. Rose hesitated only briefly. "Yes, you may, though I warn you, Sundays are for church and quiet reflection. I'll bring my Bible and best behavior," he promised with a smile. "Good night, Miss Garrison." "Good night, Mr. Vance." She picked up the reins, then paused. "And thank you again. This evening was unexpected." His expression softened. "For me as well." As Rose drove home under the starlit sky, she found herself smiling despite the late hour and the chores that awaited her at dawn. For the first time in years, she felt a lightness in her heart, a small, fragile hope that perhaps there might be more to life than she'd allowed herself to imagine. True to his word, Brock appeared at the Garrison homestead the following afternoon, dressed in his Sunday best with his Bible tucked under his arm. Rose and her father had returned from the small church in town an hour earlier, and she was preparing their midday meal when he arrived. Thomas Garrison answered the door, appraising the younger man with a father's critical eye before inviting him in. "Mr. Vance," Rose greeted him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're welcome to join us for dinner." "I'd be honored," Brock replied, handing Thomas his Bible. "My mother's. One of the few things I've carried with me since leaving Virginia." Thomas examined the well-worn book with approval. "A man who respects the good book is welcome at my table." During the meal of chicken, potatoes, and fresh green beans, Thomas subtly interrogated Brock about his background, experiences during the war, and plans for the future. Brock answered each question honestly, neither boasting nor minimizing his past. "I won't pretend I've lived a perfect life, sir," he said at one point. "I've made my share of mistakes, but I've tried to learn from them." Thomas nodded, seeming satisfied. After the meal, he excused himself for his customary Sunday nap, leaving Rose and Brock to clean up together. "Your father is a good man," Brock commented as he dried the dishes Rose washed. "The best," she agreed. "Though his health worries me. His hands pain him terribly in the mornings and his breathing isn't what it should be." "Has he seen the doctor in town?" Rose shook her head. "Can't afford it. Besides, Pa's stubborn. Says it's just age catching up to him." Brock frowned but didn't press the issue. When the kitchen was tidy, Rose suggested they sit on the porch to enjoy the afternoon breeze. They settled into the two rocking chairs, the familiar creak of the wood a comforting backdrop to their conversation. "Tell me about your mother," Brock said. "You mentioned she taught you to dance." Rose smiled at the memory. "She loved music. Brought her piano with her all the way from St. Louis when she married Pa. She would play in the evenings and we'd push back the furniture and dance." Her smile faded. "We sold the piano after she died. Needed the money for medicine for Pa." Brock was quiet for a moment. "My mother loved music too. Couldn't play a note, but she sang like an angel. At least, that's how it sounded to me." "When did you lose her?" "During the war. Typhoid swept through our county in '63. My father had already passed, and my older brother died at Antietam. By the time I returned home in '65, there was nothing left for me in Virginia." Rose studied his profile, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of his losses. "So you came west." "Seemed as good a direction as any," he agreed. "Spent some time drifting, taking whatever work I could find. Discovered I had a way with horses." "Is that what you do at Diamond Bar?" "Work with the horses," he nodded. "Cooper has me breaking the new stock. It's good work, though temporary. Most ranches only need extra hands seasonally, and then you'll move on." Rose tried to keep her tone neutral, though the thought of him leaving stirred an unexpected disappointment. Brock turned to look at her directly. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I find a reason to stay." The weight of his words hung between them, full of possibility. Rose felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "Mr. Vance, Brock," he corrected gently. "After sharing a dinner table and washing dishes together, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Brock," she amended, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "I'm not sure what you're looking for, but I should be clear. I'm not," she gestured vaguely at herself, "what most men want." His expression remained serious. "And what is it you think men want, Rose?" She looked away, embarrassed. "Someone delicate, pretty. Someone who doesn't take up so much space in the world." "Is that what they told you growing up? That you take up too much space?" "They didn't have to tell me," Rose replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I could see it in their faces, hear it in their whispers." Brock was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was low and intense. "When I was 15, my father took me hunting in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We tracked a doe for hours, and when we finally spotted her, I raised my rifle. But my father put his hand on the barrel, pushing it down. 'Look again,' he said, and I realized she wasn't alone. There was a magnificent buck standing guard over her, antlers spread wide, powerful and proud." He leaned forward, eyes fixed on hers. "My father told me something I never forgot. He said, 'Son, in nature, strength is beautiful. Never let anyone tell you different.' He was talking about the deer, but I think he meant more than that." Rose felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the ones he'd witnessed on their first meeting. "I should go," Brock said, standing. "Cooper wants us up before dawn tomorrow to move cattle to the south pasture." Rose walked him to his horse, unsure what to say after his story. As he mounted, he looked down at her with a gentle smile. "May I call on you again? Perhaps next Sunday?" "I'd like that," she replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Over the following weeks, Brock became a regular visitor at the Garrison homestead. Sometimes he would arrive on Sunday afternoons. Other times he would appear unexpectedly after work, helping Thomas with repairs around the property before joining them for supper. Through their conversations, Rose learned more about his life, the battles he'd fought in, the places he'd seen in his travels, the books he'd read during lonely nights on the trail. In turn, she shared stories of growing up in Fort Sumner, her mother's teachings, and her dreams of someday expanding their small garden into a proper farm that could sustain them more comfortably. One evening in late August, Rose found herself alone with Brock on the porch after her father had retired early, complaining of a headache. The night was warm, with a blanket of stars overhead and the distant yipping of coyotes punctuating the cricket song. "I spoke with Cooper today," Brock said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Asked if he might need a permanent hand." Rose's heart quickened. "And he's considering it. Says he's impressed with my work so far." Brock shifted in his chair to face her. "But I wanted to make sure you wouldn't object to my staying in the area." "Why would I object?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Brock reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Because if I stay, Rose Garrison, it will be with the intention of courting you properly. And that might make things difficult for you in town." Rose looked down at their joined hands, as large and calloused, hers soft from washing and cooking but strong from farm work. "You know what they say about me, that I know what small-minded people say," he interrupted gently. "And I don't give a damn." "Language," she admonished automatically, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "Apologies," he said without a hint of remorse. "The point stands. I care about what you think, Rose, not them." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Then yes." I would very much like you to stay and court me, as you put it." His smile in the moonlight was worth every moment of doubt she'd ever experienced. The following Sunday, Brock escorted Rose and her father to church. His presence beside her as they entered the small, whitewashed building caused a ripple of whispers among the congregation. Rose held her head high, refusing to be cowed by the stares and murmurs. After the service, several of the church ladies approached, suddenly eager to include Rose in their circle now that she had a gentleman caller. Their transparent shift in behavior both amused and irritated her, but she maintained her politeness, introducing Brock to each of them with calm dignity. As the weeks passed and summer gave way to fall, Brock's courtship became the talk of Fort Sumner. Some approved, noting his hard work at Diamond Bar and respectful demeanor. Others, like Eliza and her friends, made snide comments within earshot when Rose visited town. "Must be desperate for a woman," Eliza remarked loudly in the Mercantile one afternoon. "Or perhaps he's after their land." Rose ignored them, selecting her purchases with deliberate care. She was growing accustomed to dismissing such pettiness, finding strength in the knowledge of Brock's genuine affection. That affection was demonstrated daily in small ways. He would bring her wildflowers gathered on his rides across the ranch. He carved a new rolling pin when hers broke during bread making. When Thomas's cough worsened as autumn progressed, Brock insisted on paying for the doctor to visit, brushing aside their protests. "Consider it an investment in my future father-in-law's health," he said, the casual reference to marriage causing Rose to blush deeply. The doctor prescribed rest and a tonic for Thomas, along with strict instructions to avoid the cold. With winter approaching, this meant most of the outdoor work would fall to Rose. "I'll help when I can," Brock promised after the doctor left. "Cooper gives me Sundays off, and I can ride over after work some days." "We'll manage," Rose assured him, though privately she worried about the heavy workload ahead. In early November, an unexpected blessing arrived in the form of an early payment from Diamond Bar for a parcel of the Garrison's hay. Cooper himself delivered it, explaining that their own crop had come in short. "Vance suggested we might buy yours," he said, handing Thomas an envelope. "Said it was the best quality he'd seen in the territory." Thomas opened the envelope, his eyebrows rising at the amount inside. "This is too much, Cooper." "Fair market value," the rancher replied firmly. "Good hay is worth its weight in gold when winter hits hard." After Cooper left, Thomas handed the envelope to Rose. "This will see us through winter without touching our savings." "Your young man has a good head for business." "He's not mine yet, Pa," Rose protested, though the thought warmed her. "Only a matter of time," Thomas predicted with a knowing smile. As if to prove him right, Brock arrived that Sunday with news. "Cooper's offered me the foreman position starting in the new year. Jenkins is retiring to live with his daughter in Santa Fe." Rose's heart soared at the news. "That's wonderful." "There's more," Brock continued, his expression serious but eyes alight with purpose. "The position comes with the use of a small house on the property. Nothing fancy, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it's solid with a good roof and a stone fireplace." Thomas cleared his throat. "Sounds like you're settling in for the long haul, Vance." "Yes, sir, I am." Brock turned to Rose, taking her hands in his. "Which brings me to my question. Rose Garrison, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had sensed the direction of their courtship, the actual proposal left Rose momentarily speechless. She looked into Brock's earnest face, seeing nothing but sincerity and hope there. "Are you certain?" she whispered, one last doubt surfacing. "There are plenty of women who would—" "I don't want plenty of women," he interrupted firmly. "I want you, only you." "Yes," she said, joy bubbling up within her like a spring. Yes, I will marry you, Brock Vance. He pulled her into an embrace, mindful of Thomas's presence but unable to contain his happiness. Thomas watched them with misty eyes, his approval evident in his smile. When? Rose asked when they finally separated. Christmas, Brock suggested. That gives us 6 weeks to prepare and we can move into the house right after. What about Pa? Rose looked at her father with concern. I've thought of that too, Brock said. The house at Diamond Bar is small, but we could add another room come spring. Until then, we'll make do. Thomas shook his head. I won't crowd newlyweds, but I appreciate the thought, son. You're welcome on our land anytime, Brock insisted. We'll figure out the details. The weeks leading up to the wedding flew by in a flurry of preparations. Rose sewed a new dress from fabric Brock had ordered from Santa Fe, a rich burgundy wool that complemented her auburn hair and fair skin. The women of the church, seeing which way the wind blew, organized a small celebration after the ceremony. Even Eliza and her friends seemed to have accepted the inevitable, offering stiff congratulations when they encountered Rose in town. Their curiosity about what had attracted Brock to her was palpable, but Rose no longer cared about their opinions. She had found someone who valued her for exactly who she was. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of snow on the ground that lent a festive atmosphere to the proceedings. Rose dressed carefully in her new gown, arranging her hair in a simple but elegant style topped with a small wreath of evergreen sprigs and dried berries that Brock had fashioned for her. Your mother would be so proud, Thomas said, tears in his eyes as he prepared to escort her to the church. You look beautiful, daughter. Thank you, Pa, Rose whispered, kissing his weathered cheek, for everything. The church was filled with townsfolk, some genuinely happy for the couple, others simply curious to witness the unlikely pairing. Rose barely noticed them as she walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Brock, who stood tall and handsome in a new suit beside the preacher. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When Brock recited his vows, his voice rang with conviction that left no doubt of his devotion. Rose's own vows were spoken softly but clearly, her heart too full for eloquence but sincere in every word. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared. You may kiss your bride. Brock's kiss was gentle but thorough, prompting a few chuckles and one whoop from a Diamond Bar Ranch hand in the back of the church. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Vance, Rose felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd experienced before. The celebration afterward was lively, with food contributed by the church ladies and music provided by the town's amateur musicians. Brock never left Rose's side, his hand resting protectively at her waist as they received congratulations and well wishes. Near the end of the festivities, Rose found herself momentarily alone when Brock stepped away to speak with Cooper about arrangements for their move to Diamond Bar. Eliza approached, her expression unreadable. Congratulations, Rose, she said, her tone carefully neutral. You've surprised us all. Thank you, Eliza, Rose replied, determined to be gracious. I must admit I don't understand it, Eliza continued, unable to resist one last barb. What a man like him sees in, she gestured vaguely at Rose. Before Rose could respond, Brock appeared at her side, his arm sliding around her waist. Sees in my wife, he finished for Eliza, his voice pleasant but with an edge of steel beneath. Everything worth having, Miss Taylor. Strength, kindness, intelligence, beauty. I'm the fortunate one here, make no mistake. Eliza's face flushed, and she retreated without another word. Brock turned to Rose with a smile that softened his features. Ready to leave, Mrs. Vance? Yes, she said, the new name sending a thrill through her. Take me home. Their first night as husband and wife was spent at the Garrison homestead, with Thomas tactfully staying in town with friends to give them privacy. Brock had arranged for their belongings to be moved to Diamond Bar the following day, allowing them this one night in Rose's childhood home before beginning their new life together. Rose had prepared the house with care, placing fresh linens on her bed and filling a vase with dried flowers on the bedside table. Still, as Brock carried her over the threshold that evening, she felt a flutter of nervous anticipation, having second thoughts. He asked gently, setting her down in the lamplight of the main room. "No," she assured him, "just new territory." He smiled, stroking her cheek with his thumb. "For me as well in many ways. You've never been married before." The question slipped out before she could consider its implication. Brock shook his head. "No, there have been women in my past, Rose, I won't lie to you about that, but never anyone I wanted to build a life with until you." The honesty in his eyes banished her remaining nervousness. "I'm glad," she whispered. "So am I," he replied, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that quickly deepened into something more urgent. Later, as they lay tangled in the bedsheets, Brock traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you?" Sitting on that porch crying in the moonlight, Rose shifted to look up at him. "What?" "I thought, there's a woman who feels too much, and it drew me to you like a moth to flame." His fingers continued their gentle exploration. "I'd spent years keeping people at a distance, never letting myself feel too deeply about anyone or anything. But you weren't afraid to show your heart." "I was crying because I felt unloved," Rose admitted, "because I'd spent my whole life believing no one would ever want me." Brock's arms tightened around her. "You were wrong." "Yes," she agreed, nestling against his chest. "Thankfully, I was wrong." They moved to Diamond Bar the next day, settling into the small house that would be their first home together. It was indeed modest, a front room with a stone fireplace, a bedroom just large enough for their bed and a small chest of drawers, and a lean-to kitchen with a pump that provided water from a nearby well. "It's perfect," Rose declared as she arranged her few possessions. "Though we might need more shelf space for your books." Brock laughed, helping her unpack the crate containing their wedding gifts. "I'll build whatever you need. This place is ours to make what we will of it." The first months of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. Brock learned to share space after years of solitary living, while Rose adapted to being a rancher's wife rather than a farmer's daughter. They visited Thomas regularly, ensuring he was managing the homestead with the help of a local boy Brock had hired to assist with the heavier chores. By spring, they had settled into a comfortable routine. Rose cultivated a small kitchen garden beside their house and befriended the wives of other ranch hands. Her excellent cooking and warm hospitality soon made their home a gathering place on Sundays after church. Brock thrived as foreman, his fair treatment of the men and excellent horse sense earning him respect throughout the territory. Cooper relied on him increasingly, especially as cattle drives and breeding decisions became more complex with the expanding ranch operations. In late April, Rose discovered she was expecting their first child. She shared the news with Brock one evening as they sat on the small porch he had added to their house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and pink. "A baby," he repeated, his expression shifting from surprise to wonder. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be," she replied, placing her hand over her still flat stomach. "It's early yet, the baby won't come until November or December." Brock knelt before her chair, placing his hand beside hers. "A child," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our child." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Rose's already ample figure expanded further, but for the first time in her life she felt no shame in her size. Brock's appreciation for her changing body was obvious in his gaze and touch, and she blossomed under his continued affection. Thomas was overjoyed at the prospect of a grandchild, though his health continued to decline despite the warmer weather. By October, his cough had worsened to the point where Rose insisted he move in with them at Diamond Bar. "Just until you're stronger, Pa," she said as they settled him into the small room Brock had added onto the house in preparation for the baby. "The winter will be easier on you here, with us to look after you." Thomas didn't argue, a sign of how poorly he truly felt. Rose watched over him anxiously, dividing her attention between preparations for the baby and care for her father. On a cold November night, with the first heavy snow of the season falling outside, Rose went into labor. Brock rode for the midwife while Cooper's wife, Martha, stayed with her, timing the increasingly intense contractions. "You're doing wonderfully," Martha assured her, wiping Rose's forehead with a cool cloth. "First babies often take their time." Rose nodded through gritted teeth, another wave of pain washing over her. "Is Pa all right, sleeping peacefully?" Martha replied. "Don't you worry about anything but bringing this child into the world." The labor lasted through the night and into the following day. Brock returned with the midwife, who examined Rose and announced that everything was progressing normally, if slowly. "Some women are built for childbearing," the midwife commented approvingly, patting Rose's knee. "You've got good, strong hips, Mrs. Vance, just what a mother needs." The words struck Rose forcefully. All her life she had been made to feel ashamed of her generous proportions. Now, in this most fundamental of female experiences, her body was being praised for exactly those qualities. When the final stage of labor arrived late that afternoon, Rose found strength she didn't know she possessed. With Brock holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, she pushed their child into the world with a determination born of love and purpose. "A boy," the midwife announced triumphantly, holding up the squalling infant. "And a fine, sturdy one at that." Brock's face shone with pride and joy as the cleaned and swaddled baby was placed in Rose's arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently touching his son's tiny head. "Just like his mother." They named him Thomas Brock Vance in honor of both his grandfather and father. Old Thomas wept when they placed the infant in his arms the following morning. "A namesake," he marveled, studying the baby's features. "He has your mother's chin, Rose." The arrival of young Thomas brought new energy to their household. Rose recovered quickly from the birth, soon resuming her duties while incorporating care for the baby into her daily routine. Brock doted on his son, often bringing him out to the barn wrapped warmly against his chest to introduce him to the horses and ranch life. As winter deepened, old Thomas's health deteriorated further. By Christmas, he was confined to bed most days, his breathing labored and painful. The doctor visited again but shook his head privately to Brock and Rose. "It's his heart and lungs both," he explained. "Keep him comfortable. That's all we can do now." On a clear, cold January morning, Thomas Garrison passed peacefully in his sleep, his hand resting on his grandson's tiny form where Rose had placed the baby beside him for their daily visit. The loss hit Rose hard, but the presence of her son and Brock's steady support helped her through the grief. They buried Thomas on the hill behind the Garrison homestead, beneath the old oak tree where Elizabeth was laid to rest years earlier. After the simple service, Brock took Rose aside. "What do you want to do with your father's land?" he asked gently. "We could sell it, or keep it for young Thomas's future." Rose looked over the small farm where she had grown up, the fields her father had plowed, the garden her mother had tended, the house that held all her childhood memories. I don't want to sell it, she decided. Not yet. Perhaps we could rent it out for now. The house and land shouldn't sit empty. Brock nodded. I'll find someone trustworthy, someone who'll care for it properly. By spring, they had arranged for a newly married couple to lease the Garrison homestead. The young farmer and his wife were grateful for the opportunity, and Rose found comfort in knowing her childhood home would continue to be filled with life and purpose. Life at Diamond Bar settled into a new rhythm. Young Thomas grew into a healthy, curious toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's gentle temperament. Rose expanded her garden, adding medicinal herbs and flowers to the practical vegetables, and becoming known in the area for her remedies for common ailments. Brock's position at the ranch grew more secure with each season. Cooper, impressed with his management of the expanding herd, offered him a small partnership in the business during Thomas's second year. I can't afford to buy in, Brock admitted when he discussed the offer with Rose that evening. What about Pa's savings? She suggested. And we could sell some of the Garrison acreage if needed. Keep the house and enough land for Thomas someday, but use the rest for your future with Cooper. Brock looked at her with admiration. You wouldn't mind. That land has been in your family for generations. Land is only worth what it provides for those you love, Rose replied, quoting her father. This partnership would secure our future far better than holding on to fields we don't farm ourselves. With the matter decided, Brock negotiated terms with Cooper that satisfied both men. The arrangement proved profitable from the first year, allowing them to begin construction on a larger home on a corner of the Diamond Bar property that overlooked both the ranch buildings and the distant mountains. Their new house was completed just in time for the arrival of their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Martha, after both their mothers. Little Beth, as they called her, had Rose's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze, a combination that Brock declared would break hearts across the territory when she grew up. As their family expanded, so did their connection to the community of Fort Sumner. Rose's initial reception as Brock's wife had been mixed, but her quiet dignity, generous nature, and obvious happiness gradually won over even her former critics. When she organized efforts to raise funds for a proper schoolhouse, many of the same women who had once whispered behind her back eagerly joined her committee. One summer afternoon, as Rose supervised the painting of the new schoolhouse interior, Eliza Taylor, now Eliza Peterson, wife of the bank manager, approached her with an uncharacteristically humble expression. "The blue is lovely for the walls," she commented, gesturing to the work in progress. "You have a good eye for color, Rose." "Thank you," Rose replied, surprised by the compliment. Eliza hesitated, then continued in a lower voice, "I owe you an apology. For years I was unkind, I thought. That my size made me less worthy," Rose suggested when Eliza trailed off. "Yes," Eliza admitted, flushing slightly. "I was wrong and foolish. I see that now." Rose studied the woman who had caused her so much pain in her younger years. There was sincerity in Eliza's expression, along with something that looked like admiration. "We were all young," Rose said finally. "And we all have our insecurities." "You're being generous," Eliza replied, "but I appreciate it. Would you, that is, if you're not too busy with the children, would you consider joining our Ladies' Aid Society? We meet on Thursday afternoons." The invitation represented a final acceptance that Rose had long ago stopped seeking. She smiled, realizing that the approval of others no longer mattered as it once had. Still, bridges were worth building. "I'd be happy to," she agreed. Beth naps in the afternoons, and Thomas is old enough to help his father for an hour or two. That evening, As Rose recounted the conversation to Brock while they sat on the porch of their new home watching their children play in the yard, he shook his head in amusement. "Took them long enough to recognize what was obvious to me from the start," he commented, pulling her closer to his side. "And what was that?" Rose asked, leaning into his embrace. "That you, Rose Garrison Vance, are the most beautiful, desirable woman in the territory." He kissed her temple. "And that I'm the luckiest man alive to have caught your tears that night." Rose smiled, remembering the moment that had changed everything, a lonely woman crying on a porch, a stranger's kindness, and words that had begun to heal wounds she'd carried since childhood. "You are desired." "We both got lucky that night," she murmured, watching as Thomas helped his little sister to her feet after a tumble. "And every day since." As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the world in gold and crimson, Rose felt the fullness of her life, not just in the body she had once been ashamed of, but in her heart, her home, her family. She had found love not in spite of who she was, but because of it. And in that love, she had finally found herself. 10 years later, Rose stood at the window of their bedroom, watching as Brock taught their youngest son, James, how to gentle a new colt in the corral behind their home. At 12, Thomas was already showing his father's way with horses, offering advice to his 8-year-old brother from his perch on the fence. Beth, now 9, sat nearby sketching the scene in a small notebook, her auburn hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. The Diamond Bar had prospered under Brock and Cooper's partnership, expanding to become one of the largest operations in the territory. Their home had grown too, with additions to accommodate their growing family and the frequent visitors who enjoyed Rose's hospitality. The Garrison homestead remained in the family, now operated by Thomas Goodson, the young man who had leased it all those years ago. He had purchased half the acreage, while the original house and remaining land were being held for young Thomas when he came of age. Fort Sumner had grown as well, with a proper school, a larger church, and even a small library that Rose had helped establish. The town had its share of difficulties: drought years, conflicts between ranchers and farmers, the usual challenges of frontier life, but it had become a true community, one where the Vance family was respected and valued. Rose smiled as she watched Brock demonstrate a technique to James, his patience evident even from a distance. At 44, her husband was still handsome, though silver now threaded his dark hair at the temples. The years of outdoor work had etched lines around his eyes and mouth, but to Rose, they only added character to the face she loved. As if sensing her gaze, Brock looked up toward the window and smiled, touching his hat in a gesture that still made her heart flutter after all these years. Rose returned the smile, thinking of how far they had come from that first night when he had found her crying on the porch. She placed a hand on her still ample hip, remembering all the years she had wished to be different, smaller, daintier, more like the women in fashion plates and novels. How foolish those wishes seemed now, in light of the life her body had helped create. 3 healthy children, a strong marriage, a home filled with love. Brock had taught her to see herself through his eyes as strong, beautiful, desirable. But more importantly, he had shown her how to see herself through her own eyes, to recognize her worth beyond physical appearance. That evening, after the children were asleep, Rose and Brock sat together on the porch swing he had built for their 5th anniversary. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead in the New Mexico sky. "I got a letter from Cooper today," Brock said, his arm around her shoulders. "He's thinking of retiring next year, wants to know if we're interested in buying his share of the ranch." "Are we?" Rose asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear his thoughts. "I think so," he replied. Thomas is already showing a real head for the business side of ranching. Beth has her mother's green thumb and eye for beauty. And James, well, that boy was born to work with horses. A legacy for our children, Rose mused. Your mother would be proud. Both our mothers would be, Brock corrected gently. Elizabeth Garrison raised a daughter with enough strength and love to build something lasting. Rose rested her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. Did you ever imagine this, that night you rode up to a stranger's farm looking for water? Brock chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. Not in detail, no, but I knew something important was happening, something that might change everything. For a drifter, you certainly put down deep roots, she teased. Best decision I ever made, he replied, kissing the top of her head. Second only to asking a certain crying woman to dance at a town social. Rose smiled, remembering how terrified she had been that night, how certain that she would be humiliated. Instead, it had been the beginning of her journey toward true self-acceptance. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For seeing me, all of me, when no one else did. Brock turned to look at her directly, his eyes reflecting the starlight. I've never seen anything more clearly in my life, Rose Vance, and I never will. As their lips met in a kiss that still held all the passion of their early days, Rose felt the complete circle of their story, from tears of loneliness to tears of joy. From a woman who believed herself unworthy of love to one who knew without doubt that she was, and always had been, entirely and completely desired.